What is up, guys? T-Man here, and today I'm going to try something a little bit different. Basically, now that I have more time in my hands, I figure I want to get into these kind of like analysis, breakdown kind of videos. Won't always be on specific Pokemon, sometimes we'll be on team archetypes, maybe just talking about things in VGC in general, sometimes about the circuit itself. Today I'm actually going to be breaking down Tapu Koko. Tapu Koko is one of the more impactful Pokemon in the format. I think it's probably one of the most influential Pokemon in the format, and I kind of want to break down not only why it's good, but how people are beating it, and maybe look at some of the other sets that people are running on Tapu Koko, since the standard Life Orb, max special attack, max speed Tapu Koko is by far the most commonly used Tapu Koko, the one that we're seeing the most. But there are other Tapu Koko that are doing well, others that I think should be doing well, maybe haven't had that much usage yet, but we'll be covering all of that in this video. Without further ado, let's begin. So I think the first thing you have to look at is, why is Tapu Koko as used as it is? It's the third most used Pokemon in VGC 17 as far as battle spot statistics go. It'll generally be the top 3, somewhere in the top 3 of the entirety of the season, no matter where you look on Showdown, at usage statistics for regional championships, that kind of stuff, or even on Battle Spot, because Tapu Koko is probably one of the more easy Pokemon to use in the format, specifically because a few things in the format are able to rival the combination of speed and power of Tapu Koko. The fact that it is base 130 speed means that nothing in the format outspeeds it besides Pheromosa, which is absolutely phenomenal. And with that, anything else that is in that speed tier doesn't hit nearly as hard as Tapu Koko, and doesn't have nearly as many tools as well. So, as you can see here, it does have the base 95 special attack and the base 115 attack stat, and maybe some people that are not as familiar to VGC might ask, why don't we use physical variants of Tapu Koko? I think there's probably 2 reasons behind that. The big one being that Intimidate is such a huge part of VGC. As we see, the #1 most used Pokemon in the format is Arcanine, and will always be Arcanine until Intimidate Incineroar is released, if it ever is released. Just because of how impactful Intimidate is in the format. But besides that, besides having to play around Intimidate with the physical attackers, there's also the fact that Tapu Koko doesn't have a good physical move pool. The only physical attack that it gets that's really like noteworthy is Wild Charge. Outside of that, you're looking at Brave Bird, which is very, very high base power, but generally does not hit as many things as hard as Wild Charge will do, and there's not much you really need to have Brave Bird for. The only exception would be like grass types like Tapu Bulu, which doesn't see that much play to begin with. Hits Kartana for very similar damage, because Wild Charge gets the stab boost, which makes them the same base power, but then on top of that you also get the Electric Terrain boost, so not too much to be used outside of that. But there is no physical fairy stab, which is very, very unfortunate for Koko. If it did get play rough, I think we'd probably see a lot more physical Koko, but it does have a pretty decent special coverage set, because you get to run Thunderbolt, you get to run Volt Switch, which I'll get back to, because I think that's one of the most important moves that Tapu Koko runs. So it gets access to Thunderbolt, Volt Switch, Dazzling Gleam, which does give it a fairy stab, albeit a less powerful one because it is a spread move, but an important one nonetheless. And then of course it also has the access to hidden powers. So yeah, we'll see most Tapu Koko just running for speed and running for an offensive stat, most likely special attack. And outside of that, we don't see too much variance. I'll go into a few of the variants later on, but I think that's just like the cut and dry why Tapu Koko is good as far as stats go. But why is it third most used Pokemon in the format? I think that the fact that it's an electric type in a format where there are very, very few electric resists in the format is absolutely huge. If we look here at the battle spot usage statistics, then we can kind of see exactly how many electric resists there are in the format. We have Garchomp at 2 and Koko resisting itself at 3. Outside of that, though, you're looking at Kartana down at 5, which actually really just isn't a resist unless you're carrying Assault as Kartana. And then even further down, it's just nothing. We have Togedemaru with a Lightning Rod ability, with Marowak with a Lightning Rod ability, and then Gastrodon. And I think all of these Pokemon are exclusively used because of how important Tapu Koko is. And without Tapu Koko being as prevalent as it is, these Pokemon probably wouldn't see nearly as much play either. You also have to think about other electric types in the format. The main ones that you think of would be Xurkitree and Magnezone, Togedemaru like we said, and then stuff like Raichu. And I think the problem with them is you have to look and ask yourself why you'd run one of these other electric types over Tapu Koko, just because besides Magnezone, most of them don't have a really good amount of bulk. So at that point, you'd have to ask yourself, well, if they're around the same bulk, what's really different is speed. Since a lot of them hit generally for around the same damage, on Xurkitree and Tapu Koko have very, very similar damage counts, but just because Tapu Koko is base 130 speed, there's much more reason to use Tapu Koko over something like a Xurkitree, or even something like a Raichu. Fake Out's definitely a pretty cool move option, but overall the damage output from Tapu Koko is much greater there. So besides that, I think that the fact that Tapu Koko does get Volt Switch and access to Electric Surge, of course, is pretty important in a format that's kind of dominated by the rest of the Tapus as well. So basically what Tapu Koko can do and why it's so important in the terrain war is that Tapu Koko is the fastest of the 4 Tapus, and it is going to generally lose terrain wars on leads. So if Tapu Koko leads into something like Tapu Fini or a Tapu Lele or even a Tapu Bulu, Electric Surge will not go up. It will go up, and then one of the other terrains will overwrite it. But the thing is, Tapu Koko gets the access to Volt Switch, so it's really easy to kind of just bounce around, get some damage on things, and then kind of slide the Tapu Koko back in, making it easier to set up terrain. Whereas the other Tapus kind of have to just hard switch out, and then hope they can get an opportunity to switch back in later. I think that another reason why Tapu Koko is so used, like we said, the speed and the power are so significant, but when you have the ability to get Tapu Koko off the field and not have to be threatened by a lot of the other Pokemon in the format, just because it does have access to Volt Switch, you're doing, on average, probably around 30-40% of something and switching out. So Volt Switching off is something like an Arcanine, where your Tapu Koko would take probably like 70-80% from a Flare Blitz. You can actually just Volt Switch off, get the chip damage you need on the Arcanine, and then switch out into something that can take a hit better, something like a Garchomp, something like your own Arcanine. So I think that Volt Switch is a huge part of why Tapu Koko is as used as it is. So I think here we want to go and start looking at a lot of Tapu Koko sets. The most common one is definitely the Life Orb Tapu Koko set. Generally running Thunderbolt, Dazzling Gleam, Volt Switch, and Protect. There's not a lot of variation to this set. It's just a very, very consistent and very solid set. Thunderbolt's your main damage output because it is boosted by terrain. It allows Tapu Koko to stay on the field, unlike Volt Switch does. Also has the higher damage output, of course. Dazzling Gleam is actually pretty cool on this set because you do get access to a spread move, unlike Moonblast would give you, although Moonblast would definitely probably overrate Dazzling Gleam on the set if Tapu Koko did get access to Moonblast. But Tapu Koko does have the option of, getting some spread damage on the board, hitting things like Garchomp, since Garchomp is, like we said, one of the few resist to Tapu Koko in the format, so, or rather, few resist to electric moves in the format. And then Tapu Koko can just hit back with a Stay Up Fairy move and do so much damage to Garchomp. So, most Garchomps generally take around 60-70% from Life Orb Dazzling Gleam, with the bulkier ones taking closer to 55-60. The other thing about this Tapu Koko set is Volt Switch. Like we said, Volt Switch is going to be doing 40% to something and switching out, allow you to preserve Tapu Koko for later, reset terrain. You can also do some pretty funky things with Trick Room and Intimidate, you can Trick Room, and then Volt Switch out, so that you get the damage output from Volt Switch, but then you also get to get your Trick Room sweepers in, like your Gigaliths, your Snorlaxes, your Arachnids, so just a lot of options with Volt Switch there. You can Volt Switch into Intimidate, you can have Tapu Koko Arcanine left at the same time, switch out Arcanine, Volt Switch back into Arcanine so you can get the Intimidate on the same turn. There's a few applications for Volt Switch, but like I said, it's just like one of the more versatile sets in the game. I think that Modest Tapu Koko is probably a little bit better than Timid. Most people do run Timid just because you get to play the Speed Tie War with other Tapu Koko. You can outspeed some certain threats that KO Tapu Koko but aren't as prevalent, main one being like Salazzle. Outside of that, there's not too much that really outspeeds Tapu Koko if you do make the switch from Modest to Timid, but main thing is that you get the mirror match with Tapu Koko, and if you're Timid, you at least have the chance to outspeed. Main reason why I don't like it is because in those situations, a lot of times, say it's like a Tapu Koko and Arcanine out, you Dazzling Gleam with the Tapu Koko, and like you both dazzle and do maybe 60-70% to each other, because after Life Orb chip damage, you're gonna put yourself down into that range, depending like whether or not you're Modest or Timid. And then Arcanines can just clean you up with extreme speed, so generally it doesn't really matter as much with Arcanine being as prevalent as it is. Most Tapu Koko teams will be running an Arcanine, but of course Dazzling Gleam speed ties definitely will matter in a large amount of games, so running Timid to get yourself the edge in that matchup is pretty important. But I think Modest is very good as well. So the next popular set that we've been seeing is the Z-Move Tapu Koko sets. I think that Therium is probably actually a little bit less common than Electrium now, but Therium was definitely seeing a lot more play earlier on in the format. The main thing that Therium does is hits Garchomp, allows Tapu Koko to have an option to just to Oko the Garchomp before it moves so it can't get off an Earthquake. I think that's pretty cool. I do think that Electrium is a little bit better just because you do get significant damage output that allows you to KO more things that Tapu Koko normally can't KO. You know, a Twinkle Tackle won't KO many things outside of Garchomps. Occasionally Buzzwoles it can KO that it wouldn't normally be able to KO, but having access to, you know, Electrium Z to get Gigavolt Havoc is pretty cool. You can get some KOs on things like Arcanines, just to look at some of the other things in the format. You get the KO on Arcanines, you get the KO on Drifblims and Tapu Finis outside of terrain, so a lot of really cool things that you can do with Electrium. So the thing with Electrium is because the Volt Switch isn't going to be doing as much damage without the Life Orb, it's less significant to have it on the set. That opens up the third move slot for other things. I think Tapu Koko has a very wide open move slot, and you can have a bunch of different things in that slot. Taunt's definitely an option in that slot. If we go down, I know Light Screen is also pretty cool on this Tapu Koko set. I believe that's what either Ben or Zoe was running in Melbourne, maybe both. Outside of that, there is Skydrop, there's Reflect, there's Substitute. Alright, and the next set. This is actually a set that's not too common on like ladder formats, that kind of stuff, like on the Showdown ladder, but I do think it's a semi-popular option at like live events like regionals and internationals. I think that Assault Vest Tapu Koko is definitely a threat, with the main utility being the access to Skydrop. So with Skydrop, you're actually able to use Tapu Koko as a kind of ghetto form of redirection. You're able to help set things up, like Swords Dance Garchomp is the most common use of this. You can pick up a Porygon 2 and Swords Dance with the Garchomp, and then drop the Porygon 2 and Tectonic Rage it on the way down, picking up a knockout. That's probably the most common use of Skydrop, but it has a few other applications. One of the ones that I love is that you can pick things up and then switch out your other slots. So say situation would be like you're playing against a Kartana, and like you have like your Tapu Koko and say I don't know, like a Nihilego or something like that on the field, okay? what you can do is you can actually pick up the Kartana and switch to Arcanine. And since the mon that you pick up can't switch out and it can't protect, you can just drop it and attack it with whatever you switched in the slot. So it's a good way to catch some people off guard. You can also use it to kind of like lock down win conditions, since you know, if like you win the game as soon as the Kartana goes down, because maybe like you need Kartana to beat through a certain threat like Tapu Fini. Like you can pick up the Kartana and switch to Arcanine and just remove it in the early parts of the game, and there you go. You have a really nice easy win con that you can set up early in games if your opponent's not careful. Of course, in best of 3, opponents can be a lot more aware of this happening and might try and play around it, but I think it's actually kind of difficult to play around this because of the fact that the other slot has options on the next turn. Like if Arcanine switches in and say Kartana protects, or Kartana switches out into something, you pick up that. Arcanine doesn't have to stay out on the field if you switch down and say like a Garchomp. The Arcanine can also, you know, just Flare Blitz into the Kartana if it did protect, and you know, if it's likely switching out, then you can probably just go for like a Nature's Madness, something like that into that slot. But it's a pretty cool move. Nature's Madness is on the set just because without the like you know, the special attack investment, you're not really going to be doing that much damage. So Nature's Madness gives you a consistent form of damage output, allows you to you know, chunk things into range for your other attackers to kind of take them out. Things like Kartana definitely like to hit things from 50%, so definitely a powerful move, especially since unlike Thunderbolt on the more offensive sets, you're not reliant on your terrain to do damage, so that's pretty cool. Of course, the only downside is that you're always doing 50% to your target, so you're not really going to be picking up knockouts with this Tapu Koko unless you're picking up KOs with Thunderbolts from low ranges on things. But Nature's Madness Nature's Madness can certainly get you there, so definitely a pretty cool set. Last thing is a pretty interesting set that has been seeing a decent amount of play is the Bulky Choice Specs Tapu Koko. What this allows you to do is it gives you the damage output from things like the Life Orb Tapu Koko, but also allows you to run the bulk of something kind of soft as Tapu Koko. It's a little bit of like a best of both worlds kind of situation. Generally, you're going to see Thunderbolt, Dazzling Gleam, and Volt Switch like the usual sets. Dazzling Gleam doing even more damage than the Life Orb set is pretty cool, since it's generally a low damage output option to begin with, but you know, Thunderbolt hitting off of specs is doing a lot of damage. Volt Switch, like we said before, being able to do like 40, now even closer to 50 on some certain targets with Volt Switch off the specs damage is pretty significant, and then you can always just bring Tapu Koko back in later. The third move slot on Tapu Koko is kind of up in the air. I think Discharge is definitely a solid option on specs, since Discharge generally doesn't have that much damage output, just because it's a weaker move. It is a spread move, like we said before, but it is boosted by Electric Terrain and the spec, so it can do a decent amount of damage. I think that other options really would include Hidden Powers. I think that Ice and Fire are the two most likely in those situations. Fire for Assault plus Kartana, and then Ice for some things like Garchomp, since Specs HP Ice will pick up a KO on a lot of Garchomp sets. So outside of this, there's not really too much. That's all I have for sets here. I think that you know, honorable mentions would be like Tapunium Z, Tapu Koko. Having the access to do Guardian Alola, do 75% to a target is pretty cool, and you can do some pretty cool things with that. Otherwise, like I said before, I think physical Tapu Koko is something that we could potentially look into. I think that maybe physical Tapu Koko plus something like Milotic or Braviary is pretty cool, just to keep Intimidate off of that Koko. But other than that, I think that's it as far as movesets. So I think the last thing I want to talk about is how people are beating Tapu Koko, since I think that being a top 3 mon in the format, it's a really good idea for most teams to have a very solid game plan on how they're going to beat Tapu Koko. And I think it's a pretty abusable mon. The only problem is it does hit so hard that you have to be careful of not letting it do too much damage in the process of knocking it out. So the main ways that people are doing this, I think this first one is speed control. Trick Room being the main one, since Tapu Koko being as fast as it is, you can kind of just Trick Room. Porygon 2 can take Thunderbolt quite well, so it's a pretty safe option against most Tapu Koko. Just go for Trick Room with Porygon 2, and then have your other attackers in Trick Room. Just take out the Tapu Koko that way. I think the other main way that we're seeing people beating Tapu Koko with speed control, at least, is through Tailwind. Drifblim Lele is the very obvious answer to that. They go for Tailwind with Drifblim, and then the Tapu Lele should be able to beat the Tapu Koko in Tailwind, since second terrain should go up in those situations. In Tailwind, a lot of things just threaten Koko, just because the speed is a huge part of its game. And if you can take away the speed, then it's taking a lot of damage from things and likely won't be able to hang around for too long. So besides this, obviously people are using Garchomp. Garchomp is a semi-decent answer. Garchomp and Mudsdale. Mudsdale a lot harder of an answer, but Garchomp more splashable and more teams. Rage is just so good to just throw on a team. So, you know, Garchomp can go for Earthquakes into Tapu Koko, do massive damage that way. It does have to worry about Dazzling Gleams or even the slightly rare Twinkle Tackles now, so definitely not the safest answer, but it is something that people do opt for. I think that Assault Vest Garchomp is one of the safer answers to Tapu Koko if you are running Garchomp, and that brings me into my next point. I think that Special Bulk in general is also a really good way to deal with Tapu Koko. If you're able to take special hits from the Tapu Koko and then fire back with hits that are threatening it, generally you're going to be winning those trade-offs. Things like Assault Vest from like Hartana. You know, you can do Leaf Blade on Tapu Koko, and that with Assault Vest spreads usually does around like 70-80%. So having the damage output to threaten Tapu Koko without taking too much damage in the process is pretty huge. I think that like worst case scenario for Tapu Koko would be something like Assault Vest Goodra, where Goodra completely just doesn't take damage from Koko. Dazzling Gleam maybe does like 20-30% at most. So anything with really good special bulk that can also threaten Tapu Koko back with big hits is definitely going to be a big threat to Koko. And the last thing I want to bring up is terrain removal. So like we said, Tapu Koko can just Volt Switch out and reset terrains, but you do force Tapu Koko off the field if you are able to change terrain with something like a Tapu Lele, Tapu Fini, Tapu Bulu. Tapu Bulu is actually probably the best one of the three to turn off Tapu Koko's electric terrain, since Tapu Bulu does not take that much damage from something like a Thunderbolt from Koko, of course, since it is resisted. Dazzling Gleam not going to really be doing too much either, so Tapu Koko definitely does not like to play against Bulu. Bulu can get terrain up, especially since any of that damage it does do is just going to be healed off by grassy terrain. So just a few answers to Tapu Koko that I've seen people using I think are very solid ways of trying to deal with it. But yeah, that is it for me, guys. Thank you guys for watching. Let me know if you guys like this kind of content, since I will try and do more of this in the future if you guys enjoy this. But as always, make sure you guys hit that subscribe button, so I'll try and get some more of these out in the future. But that is it from me. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.